Hi, this is Kim with www.embody-light.com, and I'm back with a second video. The first one I covered some basic information you need to understand what happened in Atlantis, and I covered the lost civilization of Mu, which I don't know a whole lot about, just a little, but I do about Lemuria and Atlantis. So before I forget, my website is www.embody-light.com. Please check it out. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done so. So each subsequent civilization became heavier and denser. And as I talked about in the last video, the civilization of Mu, they were very luminous. They were just getting used to having a physical body. In Lemuria, we were getting used to having an emotional body. And so we were activating that emotional body and still trying to get used to having a physical body. And like Mu, there were many different types of beings on the planet intermingling, getting along peacefully, coexisting. It was a space age, stellar people who could communicate with other planets and come and go in spaceships. And the thing about the Lemurian people is they were semi-etheric. And so what that means is you could see a person inside, but it was not a real defined like we would look, not quite as solid, inside a great big field of light, of etheric material. I asked the guides how things appeared to us. And what they showed me, and because this is an experience I had in this life, what they showed me was, I'll go back and talk about this experience I had. It was maybe 20 years ago. And I had no idea what it was. I was walking down some wooden steps, and all of a sudden, the steps underneath me, I could see that they weren't really solid. They were a bunch of molecules moving around, held together by some pattern. And as I looked at the picnic table and a lawn chair there, it was the same thing. So I quickly got down the steps, and I felt really strange. I didn't know what it was. And once I got down the steps, I was like, I'm surprised that could hold me up. I didn't know. And so for the next little while, I had babies that I was taking out in car seats. I would set them down, go down on my butt instead of walking, and then grab that baby because I was afraid that was too much weight. I just couldn't make any sense of it. I didn't know what it was. And I would look at the trees, and I would see, that there was a tree there, but with a big field around it. And then you could see all these I don't know if they were beams of light, fairies, or energy sparks coming off this tree, and all living plants. They showed me you could merge with a flower, like a rose, and you would go into it and feel its beauty and its intelligence, and the colors and the smells were so enhanced from what we have today. So we were getting used to what happened there was we were getting used to still having a physical body and bringing the emotional level onto the planet and to us individually. And because when we came in, we were going to experience a contrast in emotions, where when we are on the other side, we're just pure joy all the time. In order to appreciate that joy that we feel, we have to needed to know what sadness was. So we came down to experience the polar opposite. And the people of Lemuria weren't liking that so much, the polar opposite. And they tended to only want the spiritual pursuits. And as I told you in the last video, 4 is our gateway. The space in between, and it's messy, and you've got 5 and above, and then you've got 5 through 12, if you want to call it that. they would have that activated, but the level 1, 2, and 3 was not so activated. They were still trying to merge with that body and get used to it. And in Lemuria, we were bringing in the mental level so that we could synchronize our mind with the mind of source and carry out our reality here. So we were learning how to control the mind. So what I found out was, between viewing the two different civilizations, that what I was shown, like with the steps and all that, that's how we viewed things in Lemuria and Atlantis. But in Atlantis, the people started getting more dense. I mean, physically more dense, heavier, and so did the objects. So the outline that I saw was actually held in place by the thought forms of all the people that lived on the planet. So what was happening to the Lemurian people is that they were, how would you say this? They were so focused on the spirituality that they kind of started to lose track of their physical reality because they weren't holding their focus on it. And so Lemuria was still existing, and there was a decision made that what would happen. The Atlantean civilizations had started, and that was more masculine. The Lemurian people were definitely a feminine-based society. So the Atlanteans were more masculine, and they were going to try to use technology to try to bring some of that masculinity onto the planet and for balance, and initially to help the Lemurian people so that they could maintain their physical reality. So what happened was then the people so Lemuria gets wiped out by some evil Atlanteans, because by the time of Atlantis, some of the people in the power and control structures started trying to take over. And so they ended up, I think they bombed them, they ended up wiping out the Lemurian society, these evil Atlanteans. And so that's how that civilization ended. But then I can speak a whole lot more on Atlantis, because I actually have quite a bit more memories of Atlantis, and a past life regression that I did with someone and got a whole bunch of information. So I have made videos and talked about this Atlantean experience before, but in case you're new to my channel, or for a reminder, I'm just going to go over it. So as I said, Atlantis, we were learning to merge the mind of ourselves and the planet with the mind of God, and to function through, I guess you would say, projection, your projected reality, to create these physical forms, as I explained when I was talking about Lemuria, the field around the form of moving molecules to hold it together. So in Atlantis, that was more of our function, to bring, to keep our reality and physicality. But some of the Atlanteans were peaceful, more feminine, and some were not peaceful. And because I told you how in the first video how the two bloodlines broke up and we had good and evil on this planet. So the way I found out about all of this was back in, I'm going to guess, sometime between 2004 and 2006, a long, long time ago. I had just, a couple of years ago, completed my training in hypnotherapy, and I ended up getting an office at a store in Minneapolis that sold crystals and rocks, and it was called Stonehenge at the time. And what I did was, there was office space. It was an old house, 3-story house. There was the store on the first floor. Upstairs, second floor was office space and classroom space. And then the third floor was an apartment, which they just couldn't keep rented, I think because of all the energy in there. And so I had a friend, so I had one office, and then my friend Jay had the other office. That's how I met him. And what I did was, because I had just completed my training not that long ago, I didn't have a client base. So what I did was, I made an arrangement with the owner, because she was closing the store 2 days a week. and working in at 5. I kept the store open and ran the store for those 2 days in exchange for my office. And so Jay and I started doing weekly trades, and he was trained in myofascial release and Reiki, and I was mainly trained in the hypnotherapy back then. That was my main modality, my only training at the time, besides the healing that I knew how to do. So we started doing trades, and at first just the normal hypnotherapy kind of stuff is what we did, but then we got bored and started doing past life regressions. One of the first ones he got to was a past life in Atlantis. And so here's what I found out from him during that. And there's more to it I'll add also. But anyway, so he was actually a woman in that lifetime, and I never did catch what his name was, but he had a child. And that child he identified as somebody we both knew, a friend of ours, in this lifetime. And so that was his child, and I was his niece. My name was Helene. I had a twin sister. I didn't find this out from Jay. I found this out from my own memories and stuff that came up after. But I also had a twin sister named Kai, that was it, Kai. And so from what Jay told me, I was this little girl about 3 years old, and he said, oh, she has a really good sense of humor. She's a lot of fun. And he said her mother is not providing her what she needs. My mother was her in that lifetime sister, and that she was really had political aspirations, and the mother and the father, but they were benevolent, and that they were just kind of letting the kids run amok, basically. They weren't really parenting the kids. And so we were this peaceful society, and then we started having beings coming around us that Jay described one who had blue skin, and his name was Azure. And he was one of the negative ETs that were on the planet to cause disruption. And so some of the questions I asked Jay before I get to the actual flood was I wanted to know what life was like back then. And me, in my understanding, I'm thinking, well, it was so long ago, we're obviously more advanced, which wasn't true. They were more advanced than we are. But one of the questions I asked, well, okay, what do we eat? What kind of foods do we eat? And it was fish, it was a lot of different birds, fruits, things native to the area we were at. One of the images we went to, there was some kind of a party, and they had wine there. And Jay said everybody was a little bit intoxicated, a little bit tipsy. And so one of the things I asked is, do we have machines like lawnmowers? How do we mow our lawns? And what he told me was, well, because it's so much in sync with nature at this point, we hadn't lost that. Our consciousness was kind of fused with or merged with the consciousness of the plants and grass. And the grass only grew, or ground covering, I don't know if we called it grass, only grew to the level that we needed. We didn't need lawnmowers. I asked, did we have plumbing? Yes, it was all based on gravity. We had all those things. And then one of the next questions I asked was, okay, what about, the conception of children? Is there some form of birth control, or did people just have child after child like they did in some points in history? And he said, well, no, we had much more control of our bodies back then. And so like the female wouldn't ovulate unless she gave her body permission, basically. I don't know how else I'd say that. But the other thing that happened was you didn't just create a life and get whoever you got. You actually had to, before any of this could occur, you actually had to make a petition to the incoming soul and their angels, guides, whoever of that incoming soul would determine if you were the best fit for this child and if this child should come in at this point. So it was a lot more involved than how we do it today as far as that. So access wasn't granted to people who weren't ready to be parents, which we should maybe go back to that today, I think. So there were all of those kinds of things. It was a completely different society. And again, we had 36 to 38 different types of beings coming and going from different planets, spaceports, all kinds of different things. So life's going on, and this evil bunch of Atlanteans, negative, malevolent, were trying to take over for the dark side. And we were noticing things like electrical thunder, lightning, storms way up in the clouds. We noticed the skies looked different. We noticed, because we didn't really have clocks, but we used things like sundials. But what we noticed, besides the sundial was off, was that the sun would cast shadows throughout different parts of the day on different objects, and we noticed that those shadows were moving. And the winds were getting wild, and all of a sudden the floods came. As they were coming, before they came, Jay, who was my aunt, was a very powerful healer, priestess kind of person. I guess that's what we would call her back then. She had what the evil, negative ETs had done, Atlanteans, is they had pointed some large generator crystals we had at the moon. At the time, this is Jay's story, we had 2 moons. They obliterated one, and that's what caused the flood. So the waters came, and Jay and his family, his husband, if we had marriages back then, I never touched on that, and his child did not get away. They drowned in the flood. But my family and I, when I viewed this, got away on a boat. And at first I thought it was a speedboat, but subsequent dreams and intuitive information and information from my guides, what I found out was we actually had vehicles that could travel by land, by water, by sea, or by air. And what was going on was, because the waters came so quick in that flood, is we couldn't gain the momentum we needed to quite lift off. So we're out in what looks like the ocean. We're in this boat. A big wave comes, and we had to kind of ride it like this, going around. Well, I'm holding on to my sister, who was born second, so I took that seriously, that I was her big sister, even though I was a few minutes older. I was holding on to her for dear life, and she slipped out of there and drowned. And I was so little, I didn't quite know what happened. I was very, very upset. Next memory I have is we're on somewhere that looks like Hawaii. I don't know if it was Hawaii, but it was tropical. It was a beach, palm trees, those kinds of things. And for days and days, I think I always went to the beach, sat against the palm tree, and watched out at the ocean, watched into the ocean. And I remembered that forever. Even when I was a little girl, I came in remembering that. I'll tell you how in a minute. But so I always thought I was waiting for something or someone. And I didn't realize till later, because I was so little, I didn't understand what death was, because people lived for thousands and hundreds and thousands of years back then. And my sister was gone. I thought she would, because the ocean or the waves took her, I thought the waves would bring her back to me, and I was waiting for her. Forever. And when I was a small child in this lifetime, our mother was ill, physically ill. And one of the things she did, she said her doctors told her every day to take a nap. That would help. So us children had to take naps too, long beyond the time that children needed to take naps. So I really wasn't tired, and I'd be in there, and I would close my eyes, and all of a sudden I would see like the sun, and it would start getting really warm in my room. I could feel it, and I could smell the ocean and hear the waves. And that would just I'd stay in that state the whole time till my mom said to get up. And what I didn't know was I was actually remembering Lemuria. One of my goals coming into this life was I wanted to find my sister. And I did, and we are very good friends to this day. It was very unusual how I found her. But I had remembered that all of my life, sort of, and her and I had had lifetimes on other planets. Now, I know that her and I had two lifetimes on Earth where we were twins. There was another lifetime that was in the Holocaust, and then one lifetime when I was her mother. So I know I did find her at other periods in time, but because this was the ascension cycle in this lifetime and we wanted to bring it all together and heal all of our wounds, her and I came together in this lifetime so that we could finally be together and heal that very, very painful memory. So that whole civilization was wiped out, but not entirely. So like me and my family got away, and there were others. Some groups went into the caves and went underground, and they were spared. And there are still underground groups today, because they live for hundreds and thousands of years, that are still living underground. They have underground cities. Telos is one. I'm sure you've heard of them. You can research it. But the remainder of us that were on the surface, because all the people that died, it did something to the genetics. Their genetics were turned way down, because after this happened, our planet got quarantined and a veil was put over. But the people who were still here still had the genetics of the Atlantean people and the advanced abilities. So they went on to have children, and they went on to have children. So these advanced genetics were still passed on. They weren't lost, but they became very sporadic within society. So, same with the dark side. A lot of them survived and reincarnated back into, if they didn't survive, reincarnated back into their families of origin, their reptilian families. But here's the thing, somebody who incarnates from the light, our minds are wiped when we come in currently. We don't remember what our past lives have been. But not the malevolent. They remember when they're born, they remember everything. They may have been an evil dictator in one life, maybe 100 years later, 50 years later, could be 20 years later. They're reborn into another person who's going to be an evil dictator. That's just the way they do it. But us on the light side do not remember. We have to play this little game of forgetting and then remembering and reclaiming our energy. But I guess that's what we got to do for now. So, let's see, is there any other points I needed to make? I can't really think of any. And so, that being said, I love you all. Have a blessed day. My website is www.embody-light.com. And before I sign off, the part I didn't really stress enough, I don't think, was that with our thought forms, remember how I talked about the steps that were moving molecules? It was the Atlantean period where we were really learning to use our mind. And so we were the ones with our thought forms and the thought forms of everybody else that were creating these structures. And it was important for us to use our mind and to learn to use our mind like that. But things got very out of balance. By the time Atlantis ended, there also were the evil people that were doing human experiments, making half human, half animals, just all kinds of wickedness on the planet. And so some of the tales tell where God decided to wipe them out because they were too wicked. In my estimation, that was not Source God, that was the Anunnakis and the people that were the controllers. The other thing is, out of these evil bloodlines were born like our leaders and that kind of thing. In the royal families, they're all usually from the reptilian bloodline. They may get a celestial in there now and then, like Diana was in marrying King Charles. She was celestial, he was not, and they wanted her genetics to try to make theirs more powerful in their offspring. So what would happen is you'd have an offspring that's like 50% reptilian, 50% celestial, and they're going to try to sway them to go the other way. And so now I'm done. That was all I had to say, and it may have been a repeat, but I wanted to stress it. So again, I love you all. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.